Hi, everybody. This is Klaus Ehlers. This is Klaus in 60 Seconds live on Facebook, where we take about 20 minutes and have really interesting conversations with really amazing folks whose work in some way or other intersects with Family Promise. And we've had some really good shows the past couple of weeks talking about volunteerism, the changing face of volunteerism, virtual volunteerism, really relevant to us because of our community-based efforts. Today, we're going in another direction. I'm super excited about my guest today because we're going to be taking a look at how the media addresses issues of poverty and homelessness, and how to get the deeper understanding we need to have so that people can look at issues like family homelessness and take action. And I think the news media obviously is critically important in telling that story. So my guest today is Zoe Clark from Michigan Public Radio. She is the program director there. She is amazing. And we're going to have a nice little chat about the news media, poverty issues, family homelessness, and more. So let me introduce Zoe. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Klaus. Thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Did I get your title right? I never get anybody's title right. You are program director for Michigan Public Radio.
Yeah, and as I like to say, my mom doesn't even know exactly what that title means. It packs a lot into it. So you absolutely got it right. Yeah.
Okay. So just in the interest of full disclosure here, Zoe and I are cousin outlaws. We were trying to understand what is the right term for this familial condition. My wife is Zoe's husband's cousin. So we're not in-laws. So we figured we're outlaws.
We're outlaws. My new favorite term.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm a big public radio fan. When I'm in Michigan, I listen to Michigan Public Radio. Whatever state I'm in, I'm listening to the public radio when I could travel. Before I was stuck in New Jersey all the time. There's nothing wrong with New Jersey.
Right.
So I'm really excited to have this conversation because there's so many intersections, and it's from our perspective, from the service provider's perspective, every issue is like every organization that deals with a particular issue is like, why isn't our issue getting more coverage? So that's what we're going to be asking you. So the first question I want to ask is, right, with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of media coverage of poverty, right, that we hadn't usually seen, right? 8 million Americans got pushed into poverty last year by the pandemic and the economic outcomes. How would you assess how the news media has covered the poverty impacts of COVID?
Oh, I think it's such a good question, and I'm not taking a dodge here by any type of woe is me answer. But I think with every human who is experiencing COVID, all of us are overwhelmed by it. And that includes the news media, right? When we say this is a once in a lifetime, once in a century pandemic, we mean it for every kind of profession, every kind of human, and every kind of existence. And so I think at first it was sort of a punch in the gut of trying to figure out, like everyone in every profession, how do we do our jobs right now, right? That's the first thing. Remotely. How do we make sure that we're talking to people and getting the story when we still weren't exactly sure, remember in the beginning, exactly how bad COVID was and how it was spreading. So at first there's that kind of initial shock of just telling sort of the breaking news story, where in that beginning of March, at least here in Michigan, everything was shut down and everything was closed, right? And so with any kind of journalism, with that sort of breaking news, and sometimes that's the first hour, sometimes it's the first 24 hours. With COVID, it feels like sometimes it was the first weeks. It's just trying to get out basic information, right? And then after that initial kind of whiplash sort of stopped, we started looking at folks who have been the most impacted by this pandemic. And, of course, as you mentioned, what we saw is it was folks who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And here in Michigan, which is true, throughout other states, is the racial disparities having to do with COVID as well, particularly in the city of Detroit, which is within our listening audience. So, in the beginning, I'm not going to give us high marks, but I also am not sure that I give us high marks for coverage of any specific issue surrounding COVID, because in the beginning it was so much about treading water and getting people what seemed to be just sort of the safety information, right? Since then, at least here at Michigan Radio, and of course I can only speak for that, but I of course am a big fiend of all kind of media, whether it be commercial, whether it be not for profit, whether it be print or radio or broadcast. I think we're still struggling how to tell that story, and we're struggling because there were huge stories that surrounding COVID as well, which was a historic presidential election, as well as reckonings about social and racial injustice. And so, unfortunately, I think issues surrounding about poverty might have gotten and continue in some respects to be sort of molded together along with economic issues, right? I do think the issue of poverty and homelessness, unfortunately, right now is taking a lot of center stage. And that's because, I'm sure it's the same in Jersey, how cold it is. And one of the stories right now is, how do you keep people warm when people don't have single family houses and are being told, of course, to quarantine, to socially distance. And so what does that mean for shelters, right? And what does that look like? And so I think those kind of almost infrastructure stories about homelessness and poverty are starting to be brought to the forefront right now because of the weather. But I certainly think how to tell the stories of poverty during COVID is something that we are continuing to tell. But again, there have been so many effects, whether it's on educators, right? Whether it's on healthcare professionals, that it's a lot of work.
I hear what you're saying there. I think the news media really has done a good job of really highlighting poverty overall. I mean, we see a lot, and I think we see people understanding some of the implications and the extent to which people they did not recognize as being in poverty or being at risk actually were. I think that is one sort of positive outgrowth of the current crisis is people recognize that a waitress, a landscaper, a hotel clerk, that there was a large swath of people who were vulnerable. So I give the media pretty high marks for talking about poverty during COVID. But
well, then we'll find an average grade. How about for we'll meet in the middle.
Well, but one thing that for us, right? So in our particular niche, like we look at a statistic from the Department of Education, and we talk about this all the time. 1 out of 16 children in the United States will experience homelessness by the time they turn 6 years old, right? So you picture a kindergarten classroom of 16 kids. On average, one of those kids will have experienced homelessness by the time they go to first grade. And I think that's a profound and shocking stat. And certainly you get conversations about poverty, you get conversations about homelessness, but outside of COVID and just, because that stat predates COVID, to us in our neck of the woods, we're like, why isn't that a bigger story? So, I don't know, would you agree that that's an under-publicized story, and why do you think it is?
So yes, that's a great question. And I'm also going to go back in our time machine, pre-COVID, and I'm going to actually take us back, if you're willing to, 5 or 6 years ago. And we did a series, a 5-year longitudinal reporting series called State of Opportunity here in Michigan. And it was 2 reporters who were embedded in 2 different areas of Michigan. One is Detroit, which is in Southeast Michigan, the state's largest city. The second was Grand Rapids, which is on the west side of Michigan and is the state's second largest city. And our 2 reporters embedded themselves in 2 schools, both of which had economically challenged population. And we did what we do, a perceptual study, basically. So before we start, we talk to our listeners and we ask how much do they know about issues surrounding poverty? How much do they actually know? At that point, the statistic in Michigan was 1 in 4 children live in poverty in Michigan. And listeners were shocked by that, just shocked. And we did, and we did kind of not multiple choice. I don't want to make it sound so small and pedestrian or something, but we sort of asked people to rank what they felt like were the biggest issues having impact on the state, right? And maybe it was jobs, economy, infrastructure, fresh water. That's huge here in Michigan. Poverty was very low on that list of concerns. Cut to 5 years later, we did the exact same questionnaire. Rank what you think are the most important issues surrounding, public policy in Michigan. And lo and behold, issues surrounding poverty increased. Now, can I say, oh, it's because Michigan radio, told these stories twice a week for 5 years? Of course I can't. Can I hopefully believe, though, that having these two reporters embed themselves and do nothing but tell these stories for 5 years, and these were long form stories, these were quarterly documentaries, did some good? I can sure hope so. So I think it's fair to say that sometimes listeners are not aware, or viewers or readers, again, whatever medium you're talking about, are not aware if they're not living it. But I think that's just sort of human nature, right? And that it's part of the media's job then to put that mirror up to society so that folks aren't as shocked when they hear those numbers and understand just how bad it is. And back to your point about, there's so many Michiganders who continue to live paycheck to paycheck. And so this idea, when the state of Michigan was under lockdown, folks who are salaried workers, that is not to say this was not easy, but like you said, a waitress, right? Mm-hmm. Or who works on hourly wages or tips, and suddenly that profession is stopped. It's not I'll dip into my savings for the next few months. What savings? Right? And so telling those stories and the importance of this idea of just going, or God forbid we have to jump into our 401k. What 401k? So again, I think putting those lenses on folks and their real lives can help to create less of a say what? I didn't know that, make the ignorance about the issue. And again, that's not ignorance out of just someone not wanting to know, but if you don't see it firsthand, it's hard to understand how prevalent it is.
That is great, and I think Mitch can put up the your website so people can actually find those stories, from Detroit and from Grand Rapids. By the way, we have a fantastic affiliate in Grand Rapids. I should do a shout out to all our Michigan affiliates. Now, hopefully I don't forget any. Genesee County, Grand Rapids, Muskegon, Berry County, and Branch County, Coldwater. So,
yeah.
So I really appreciate what you're saying there. And, I think, the challenge is, right, that the issue of family homelessness is not a visible issue. So you can have plenty of picturesque stories about chronic single homelessness because you can have a woman pushing a shopping cart, and you don't have that with families, and so it becomes less visible. And so the work you've done, it's really great to hear about that, because it does I do believe that you guys probably push that needle. The challenge is that I think in the more mass media imagination, you just don't see that same level of care. So that's why I want Mitch to put up the Michigan Public Radio site so people can go to it. So you mentioned Flint, and we have an affiliate in Genesee County, and the water crisis. And I want to zero in on that. I mean, Michigan, you guys have had your opportunity to be in the news a lot lately. Congratulations. But the Flint water crisis, which has reemerged as a story recently, is a really big one. And I would love to hear your thoughts about what was the role in the media in terms of creating action on that, or the lack of action. Like, what, right? The news media needs to inform us, but it also needs to mobilize us. It needs to give us something we can do about. So how would you judge how the media handled the Flint water crisis and the impacts that had?
It's such a loaded question, and I'm just taking a second to take a breath, because that period of time for Michigan radio, and the amount of teamwork that went into telling that story, is something like I've never seen in my career before. I'd never seen anything like the Flint water crisis in my career before. We were starting to hear folks in Flint, because we have a reporter in Flint, and we were starting to hear of these issues surrounding water, groundwater, muddy water, water that was stinky, rashes, physical manifestations. And we continued to go to the state time and again for comment. These residents continued to go to the state, and we're told that there was nothing wrong with it. It was really dark days telling those stories, because in some ways it felt like we were being gaslit. We did some data on a lead in the water test, and we have some incredible reporters at Michigan Radio 2 who are part of an environmental team with science backgrounds. They got the data back, and we were ready to publish and to go to air with it. And we held back because the data couldn't possibly have been accurate. There was no way that there could be that much lead in the water. We just figured there was something wrong with the test. We waited because we were just sure there's no way this could be possible. It turns out it absolutely was possible. So in terms of the role of the media in Flint, this was a story that worked. This was one of those times, and I tell folks, this was one of those times where you're watching journalism movies, right? And it feels like that. So much of journalism is not that. So much of my job is not that, right? It's telling stories that matter, and telling you the breaking news and things like that. But this was sort of felt like a once in a lifetime sort of event, the Flint water crisis and how it played out. I mean, and they've since made Lifetime movies about it. And, there's been plenty of books about it and things like that. This was one where the media did exactly what they were supposed to do and held feet to the fire of the powerful and the accountable. Made sure that the folks who were saying there were issues were heard. But unfortunately, of course, much of the damage was done. And if you're following the story, the former governor of Michigan, who was governor at the time, Rick Snyder, has just been charged with misdemeanors over the Flint water crisis and the handling of it, as well as some other folks who were in his administration. And trials will likely be underway all these years later.
Right, with perhaps not commensurate outcomes to the impacts of the misdeeds. So that, I do think I think the Flint water crisis is an example of how dogged and impassioned media met with, I think, some really incredible civic leaders. I believe it was a pediatrician that sort of was the main whistleblower, and if I remember the story correctly,
Dr. Mona.
So it is nice to hear that story. And again, it's the frustration is that there is not going to be the accounting that really needs to be held towards a systemic issue perpetrated by people in power. But so we've got just a couple of minutes left. So two more questions. One is, on that Lifetime movie, who would you have chosen to have play you?
I had the boring job of being the boss of the person who was managing it all. So I am the desk at that point. I have an office, and it was me doing the very top level things. I would want to be able to make sure that all of the reporters who were the ones who were digging into FOIA and paperwork. I'm thinking about Lindsay Smith and Sarah Hewlett and Steve Carmody, Mark Brush, Rebecca Williams. Those are the folks who I would want to make sure got played.
So the last question I ask you is on a similar lighter note, which is, if you could choose to interview anyone from now, from history, who would you want to interview? Who would that person be?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Klaus. And it's one as a journalist, when I'm interviewed, I get asked a lot. And I have to tell you, it changes every single day. It really, really does, because I think so much, I mean, the old cliche, history repeats itself. And so I think when we find ourselves in different periods of time, I always am, as a sort of history buff and nerd, I'm always going, God, I wonder what this person or this person would have thought. So I really don't have one. And much like, asking a parent to pick a favorite child, it sort of feels that way, because to me there isn't necessarily one person that I would want to talk to. I think at given times and different points in story arcs, there's different folks I'd really want to get to speak with. Sorry, that's a total dodge. I get it.
What,
It's a total
what
dodge.
a great answer to the question. Very well. But just I have the comments page up, and there's a number of people shouting out to you, Zoe. So you've got a little bit of a fan club. So
Oh, as journalists, we're told not to read the comments. As
okay,
journalists, it's never read the comments.
I want to thank you again for speaking with us. And I think if we look at a lot of our affiliates engage with the news media. One of the challenges we have is that often news media wants to. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times people said, "Can you help us film somebody getting evicted?" Which is
Ugh.
what we're in the business of. But I really appreciate your insights, and you know, I guess, do you have any last words, sort of a tip for any of our affiliates out there on how to get their local media to tell the story about family homelessness? Can you do that in like 2 or 3 sentences? Like what are those quick bullet points of how can you get your media to tell an effective story about family homelessness when it is not this flashpoint issue, but rather this systemic problem?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. And I think, again, a lot of it gets to what are the injustices, right? Like what has created this system where we are seeing the number of folks who are homeless or living in poverty? Because if there's one things about journalists, it's they sniff out injustice and try to hold those, accountable. And so the idea of, if, and I don't mean to say, find someone who done them wrong kind of thing, but if we can look at the systemic issues and kind of explain where are the points that aren't working. Journalists, and I don't want to, I'm using the word love, and I don't mean love out of, ooh, exciting, but I mean, journalists like to tell stories of things that aren't working, and that's so that we can fix them. So if you can talk about systems that aren't working, and then maybe even know what the solution is, and explain how is it that we know what the solution is, that we have this problem, and for some reason the two haven't come together. Those are stories that we can tell. The other thing is, Klaus, I know, I want to be really careful how I articulate this, because I think there's a concern, right, of putting that one family on the spot.
Mhm.
And that's absolutely a horrific ask, right? Can I talk to a family that's struggling? At the same point, one of the things we know about journalism is we tend to get folks to hear stories when we do tell a story about one person or one family. Because when you give those larger statistics and numbers, sometimes eyes can gloss over. But when you can hear a personal story of a working mother who's got 3 kids, who's going through what she might be going through, it can feel a little more tangible. So it's a fine line of, right, about, hey, can I talk to a family, versus also, can I talk to a family? Because sometimes, especially in the intimacy of radio, being able to hear a real person rather than a talking head, at least in public radio, if the treatment is done right, can really make all the difference. I can't tell you how many times I've had listeners email when they've heard someone directly say, I want to raise money and buy this guy a car, because but it's, you've got to be careful about sensationalism as well. And so I think the final thing I would leave is, have relationships with journalists whose work you trust, and journalists whose work you feel comfortable with, and that's huge. And know what is their motivation. Ask them, what's your motivation for telling this story? And that can help you get some clarity about sort of the well-meaningness of what they're trying to get done.
That's fantastic advice. It's really good practical advice. I hope our affiliates that are watching this kind of took notes on that, and we'll kind of share. I think those are really great points.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, I'll end with this note. You have the story that people say, I'm going to buy that person the car, and then you have the inspirational story about buying the car. But the story needs to be, why is it that so many people don't have that car? But anyway, that's a social services pet peeve, right? Is the inspirational story. This guy had to walk 5 miles a day, and somebody bought him a car.
Right.
About why does the guy have to walk 5 miles a day? But anyway,
it's 100. Preach it.
So, Cousin Outlaw, it has been fantastic to have you on. You're just awesome. Give my best to Rick.
Give my best to Ellen.
She said hi to you on Facebook. Zoe, thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. If you're out there in the Family Promise world, think about what Zoe said about how to position the stories and vet the journalists that you work with. Have a great weekend, everyone.